A message from McAfee. Wondering why the post office is texting you or why you owe thousands of dollars in toll fees? Because someone's trying to scam you. The good news? McAfee can help. With McAfee's award-winning scam detection, it's easy to tell what's real and what's fake over text, in your inbox, and online. If they're
You want a free gift.
Seriously? If they're faking it, they're not making it past us. Get award-winning scam detection today. McAfee.com/keepitreal.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'm going to talk about a quote that I saw, which is correct, which said, reproductive aged mammals are restless. And then with something about them settling into, being an older mammal and being less restless and more calm. And it's true. That's true. And we will talk about it today right after I tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was, I don't know what it was. There's a lot of them. One of them was Stop Being Professor Asshole. So that was pretty good. So just get it for that one alone. But of course, I have hundreds of others if you subscribe, 200 others. All right. So reproductive aged animals are restless. Yes. They are. So what does this mean? It means that before perimenopause, when fertility wanes, and certainly before menopause, and remember, men do have a lessening of testosterone, andropause. Everybody ages. There's old men. Remember that. There's old men just like there's old women, and they're not having sex all the time either. You do see old people, right? Sometimes I feel like the people nowadays we're like siloed into these same age dystopian like categories, and we basically hang out with just everybody that's only our age, and then we forget that there's like a lifespan, and people do age, obviously, and reproductive age animals are the ones that get divorced. They're the ones that are, they're not the ones who get divorced because they just can't really stand to be around the person anymore, because that's gray divorce. But the ones that are like cheating or leaving or feel like they want some other person or that they want some other thing. This is people feeling restless is because you have these hormones pumping out of you that are telling you to go breed with another animal. Even prairie voles cheat. Did you know that? You can Google it. And there are no completely faithful animals. Yeah, some of the fairy voles don't cheat, but, some of them do. And certainly same thing with people. And so basically, when you are trying to figure out what you're doing and why you feel so bad in your relationship when you have young kids at home and you are still in your fertile years, that's usually the reason. The reason is that you are restless and you're biologically programmed to seek out another mate. There is no amount of wonderful that a mate can be that will stop you from ovulating or from menstruating or from noticing that other people are attractive. And people don't like this idea. It feels very risky. It feels like you ought to be able to hack your biology, that we ought to not be animals. But as I talk about all the time, we are animals. We are animals, and much of our behavior and our feelings are hormonally and biologically mediated. And for people to realize this, it's really a very protective factor for their marriages, because they stop thinking that everything is about the other person being terrible. And they start thinking, oh, we are just wired to feel restless at reproductive age. We are wired to want to find more excitement or more adventure, which, in terms of the species would mean sleeping with other people. You don't have to do that. Just like every time you want to say something to your boss, like, well, fuck you, you don't say that. We are wired to be aggressive if we feel threatened, to defend ourselves, but you can make the choice not to do that, right? Every time that you feel frustrated, hopefully you do not become aggressive, because if you did, then you would be in prison, and that wouldn't be good. And we have all these social contracts and norms and laws and all of these things that stop us from behaving like animals. But it's still good to understand why we do the things that we do, right? Like that's always positive. So knowing that, for example, like women come, they're very unhappy because they had a sex dream about their ex, and always I'm like, were you ovulating? And usually they say yes, because they were ovulating. Because when you ovulate, women don't have a lot of sexual partners, neither do men. It's like 4 or 5 on average. And so what do you go back to? You go back, women don't watch porn a lot of the time. And so they go back to a sexual experience that they had because their brain comes up with it because they are thinking about sex with another person. And the ex is one of the few people that they have that they can picture, right? And so then when they're ovulating, their brain comes up with that. And I have plenty of podcasts about this and about how normal it is. And men who come in, if they're especially very scrupulous and anxious, and they feel really bad about being attracted to a woman who isn't their wife, even if they don't do anything. But reproductive age mammals are restless. This, by the way, comes into play when there's the older partner, younger partner age gap relationships. And I've discussed each of those, both the older woman and the older man, in different podcast episodes. But people forget, like if they're in their 50s and their partner's still in their 40s or something, the partner is still a restless mammal. But the younger partner is, and the older partner is like, why are we fighting? Why are we going out so much? Why are we doing all these things? It's kind of time to move into that next phase where we are more stable and calm and not as restless, and things don't have to feel like such a big deal, and there shouldn't be any drama. But a reproductive age mammal is dramatic. And that's the only way that you can keep interest in your own life and continue to perpetuate the species. It's dramatic to think, oh, my baby's the most beautiful baby in the world and I would give my life for them. That's very dramatic, and it keeps our species going. It's very dramatic to say, oh, I love you above anybody else, and there's nobody else that would be like you are for me. That's not true. Like, you can find other people, but that helps us. That drama is the drama of youth, just like teenagers are dramatic, just like Romeo and Juliet is dramatic. If you get rid of the drama of a teenager, what is even left? They're all drama. Everything seems very, very important, and their life, their social life, their looks, if they fit in, if somebody looked at them the wrong way, all that stuff feels very, very dramatic. They are a young reproductive age female or male animal, and they are a very restless animal. They want to move far from home. They want to experience the world. They want adventure. And you kind of stay like that for a while, with exceptions of nesting and the honeymoon stage where you feel like this person's the person for the rest of your life and will make everything better, and everything is fine now that you met this person and you never have to worry about anything again. Well, yeah, and then you get out of the honeymoon stage and you feel restless if you are a younger animal, a fertile animal, and you want to figure out your career and your life. I mean, nothing really matters, as people start to realize in midlife, we're all going to die, right? And nobody's going to remember any of us in 100 years, most likely, but you can't think like that when you're young, or the species would never survive. That's they call it depressive realism, right? When you see things too realistically, that's not good. So yes, if a teenager was just like, well, in 80 years, none of it'll matter. I'll be dead, so why do I have to go to high school? What does homecoming matter? That would be an extremely depressed teenager. But for somebody in their 50s or 60s to say, well, I can miss that party, the world's not going to end, that's normal. It would be pretty abnormal, for somebody in their 50s or 60s or 40s or anything to say, oh yes, if I go to this one party, it's a matter of life or death, the way that a teenager would feel about prom or homecoming. We are supposed to get a wider perspective over the years and find ourselves less important and less the center of the world, and every decision that we make doesn't feel as cataclysmic because we are aware of our being a small entity in a larger world. But when you are younger, you don't think of it that way. You feel like the main character, the central figure in your own private drama. And you have to see that there's an environmental component to this as well, right? So some people are raised in their families of origin to be fairly narcissistic. And so then as you get older, these are the people that I talk about that have trouble passing the torch. So if you're in your 60s and you have trouble thinking about your 40-year-old son as a full adult, well, that's a you problem, and that you're probably going to have a bad relationship with that adult because you still treat him like a child. And that's the time where you say, oh, you're in your prime and I am older. So maybe you do know more things about the world than me. And obviously women do this as well, or still try to act like they're, 20 years younger than they are. Well, women, daughters of those women usually don't like that, right? For the mother to still be trying to compete in that sphere and wear the same clothes and all of that. Point being that, yes, there are large psychological shifts. And then within that, there's people who are parented differently and are different in the culture of their home, such that they are more different than the mean. So they are people who struggle with this change. Other people who struggle with this change from being the center of the universe to not being the center of the universe, and from being restless to acceptance and stability, are people who don't feel like they had much of a childhood or an adolescence, and they weren't able to ever be the center or the main character, and they were not ever able to feel like they were, like it was life or death if they went to prom, and to feel that Romeo and Juliet kind of love. If you didn't feel like that, then you could get into old age and become obsessed with feeling it then. But at that point, it's going to be more unusual. So like people who are like obsessed with finding ideal love, that's a criteria of narcissistic personality disorder. When you're young, though, it's just being young, like being obsessed with finding ideal love is just like being a teenager. But if you're still obsessed with finding, quote, ideal love when you're 50, then that's pretty different, and that's pretty unusual and indicates some level of lack of maturity psychologically. Because at that point, you should say, well, nobody is ideal. Nobody's a perfect person, and there's no human being that is going to make all of my issues go away. That's work that I would have to do. Certainly, there are more compatible people than others, and I would try to find them, and I could have deep love, but nothing is going to feel like honeymoon giddy Romeo and Juliet forever, whereas, of course, a teenager would think that it would, because of that restlessness, that internal hormonally motivated restlessness of the young animal. So if all of this stuff is interesting to you and you've never thought about it, then it's something to introspect about. Have I ever thought about the restlessness as hormonally and biologically and evolutionarily mediated? Or have I continued to delude myself that it's always because it's not right? My life isn't right. There's some right. Yes, there could be better partners. There could be better careers. There could be better friends. But none of it really gets rid of the restlessness if the restlessness is a default condition of being a young animal or a younger animal, a reproductive aged animal. And also, this is helpful for people who feel restless even though objectively they feel they have a good marriage. But they just feel somehow delusionally that if the partner was better, perfect, then they wouldn't feel restless. But if you think of restlessness as a default condition, well, then it can't be the partner. And you could save all that energy, because it's just like thinking like, how do I make it so I don't have a sex dream when I ovulate? Well, your body wants you to have a sex dream when you ovulate, so you will. Your partner can't be so good that you will never have a sex dream about another man when you ovulate. Or if you're a man, your wife can't be so beautiful that you would be unable to recognize a sexy woman walking down the street. That's just not possible. And it makes people very anxious to think that they don't have full control over their internal workings if they were raised particularly in an anxious home with a delusion that, you can be perfect if you just try hard enough. And those are the people who struggle the most with aging, when they no longer feel like they could just get up and have infinity energy and infinity drive and infinity focus and get anything done, and that there are mental and physical limitations on what you can achieve. So it's important work to recognize that you are not fully in charge of yourself, not cognitively, not biologically, not hormonally, nothing. And the best that you could do is to kind of see yourself and your stage and your age and your surroundings and your environment and your history, all these things more clearly and objectively, which is what we try to do in therapy and coaching, is to help give you an understandable context for how to interpret your life in a way that makes sense and that feels like you're finally kind of seeing more of reality instead of being caught up in the restlessness, thinking that the restlessness means something that it doesn't mean. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. And as always, please do subscribe. And if you want more interesting interactions, please do join the Facebook secret group. And of course, the women's midlife group, the Midlife Women's group, which I will link you to in the episode description. Thanks so much. Talk to y'all soon.